The Old West conjures images of dusty gunfights, swinging saloon doors, and lonesome cowboys riding into the sunset. But beneath these well-worn tales lies a stranger reality that most history books conveniently ignore. The American frontier was a place where the United States Army experimented with camels, where women armed themselves with 6-inch hat pins, and where entrepreneurs made fortunes hauling buffalo bones across the plains. These are the stories that don't make it into the movies. The peculiar, the macabre, and the downright bizarre truths about life west of the Mississippi. Prepare to have everything you thought you knew about the Wild West turned on its head. These 15 facts will reveal a frontier far more fascinating than any Hollywood Western ever dared to show. Number 1. The U.S. Army's Camel Corps. In 1856, the United States Army conducted one of the strangest experiments in American military history. Secretary of War Jefferson Davis, yes, the same man who would later become President of the Confederacy, convinced Congress to appropriate $30,000 for the importation of camels to the American Southwest. The logic seemed sound on paper. Camels could travel vast distances without water, carry heavier loads than mules, and thrive in desert conditions that would kill horses. For an army struggling to supply remote outposts across the scorching deserts of Texas and Arizona, camels appeared to be the perfect solution. The Army imported 77 camels from the Middle East, bringing them across the Atlantic on specially modified naval vessels. Along with the animals came several experienced camel drivers, including a Syrian named Haji Ali, whom the soldiers promptly renamed Hi Jolly because they couldn't pronounce his actual name. The camels were stationed at Camp Verde in Texas and put through rigorous testing across the unforgiving landscape. The results were actually impressive. Camels proved capable of carrying up to 1,000 pounds, nearly double what a mule could manage, and traveling 30 to 40 miles per day across terrain that would exhaust any horse. They ate mesquite and creosote bushes that other animals refused to touch. They went days without water while horses collapsed from dehydration. On paper, the experiment was a resounding success. However, the Camel Corps ultimately failed for reasons no one anticipated. Horses and mules were absolutely terrified of camels. The mere scent of a camel would send pack animals into a blind panic, causing chaos on supply routes and endangering soldiers. The camels also proved ill-tempered, prone to biting and spitting at anyone who came near. Soldiers despised the creatures and refused to work with them. Additionally, the rocky terrain of the Southwest damaged the camels' soft footpads, which were adapted for sand rather than sharp stones. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the Camel Corps was abandoned entirely. The animals were auctioned off to circuses, sold to mining companies, or simply released into the wild. For decades afterward, miners and travelers reported eerie sightings of wild camels roaming the deserts of Arizona, Nevada, and California. Ghostly apparitions that spooked horses and baffled anyone who encountered them. The last confirmed wild camel sighting occurred in 1913 near the town of Douglas, Arizona, a lonely remnant of Jefferson Davis's peculiar vision for the American West. Number 2. The deadly hat pin. Women in the Old West faced dangers that required creative solutions, and one of their most effective weapons was hiding in plain sight, stuck through their hats. The hat pin, a seemingly innocent fashion accessory, became a formidable tool of self-defense in the hands of frontier women. These pins ranged from 6 to 12 inches in length, with sharp steel points capable of causing serious injury. The hat pin's effectiveness lay in its element of surprise. A woman being accosted could draw this weapon instantly, striking at an attacker's face, hands, or throat before he even realized he was in danger. Unlike a gun, which could be wrestled away, a hat pin remained under a woman's control and required no loading or cocking. Newspapers of the era reported numerous incidents of women successfully defending themselves with hat pins. In 1899, a woman in Denver stabbed a would-be robber through the hand, sending him fleeing into the night. Another account from San Francisco describes a woman driving off two attackers by puncturing their faces with her hat pin. The weapon became so popular and so effective that several cities attempted to ban or regulate hat pins. In 1912, Chicago passed an ordinance prohibiting hat pins longer than 9 inches. Other cities followed suit, with some requiring women to purchase permits for longer pins. These laws were largely unenforceable and widely ignored. For women traveling alone on stagecoaches, walking through rough neighborhoods, or working in establishments where trouble was never far away, the hat pin provided a measure of security in an era when law enforcement was unreliable at best. Number 3. Post-mortem photography was common. Death was an ever-present reality in the Old West, and families often went to extraordinary lengths to preserve the memory of their departed loved ones. One practice that seems macabre to modern sensibilities was post-mortem photography, the act of photographing the deceased, often posed as if they were merely sleeping or even standing upright. Photography was expensive and rare in frontier communities. Many families could not afford to have their portraits taken during their lifetimes, which meant that the only photograph ever taken of a person might be after their death. Parents who lost children to disease or accident desperately wanted some image to remember them by. A post-mortem photograph became a treasured keepsake, displayed prominently in the family home. Photographers developed specialized techniques for these sessions. The deceased would be dressed in their finest clothing, positioned in chairs or propped against supports hidden from the camera. Eyes might be painted onto closed eyelids to give the appearance of life. Children were often posed with their favorite toys or surrounded by flowers. The practice extended beyond private family portraits. When notorious outlaws met their end, photographers would set up shop to capture images of the bodies for sale to the public. The corpses of Jesse James, John Wesley Hardin, and Bill Dalton were all photographed, and the images sold as souvenirs. In the case of outlaw Elmer McCurdy, killed in 1911, his body was embalmed and exhibited at carnivals for over 60 years, before finally being identified and buried in 1977. While the practice faded with the rise of affordable snapshot cameras in the early 20th century, it remains a haunting window into how frontier families coped with loss. Number 4. Ice was big business. In an era before electric refrigeration, ice was worth its weight in gold, sometimes quite literally. The ice trade became one of the most lucrative industries in the American West, with entrepreneurs going to extraordinary lengths to deliver frozen water to sweltering frontier towns. What seems like an absurdly simple commodity today was once the foundation of fortunes. Ice was harvested during winter months from frozen lakes and ponds high in the mountains. Workers would venture onto the ice before dawn, using horse-drawn plows to score the surface into a grid pattern. Then they would cut along those lines with massive saws, freeing blocks that weighed up to 300 pounds each. The blocks were hauled to shore using pike poles and tongs, then immediately packed in sawdust or straw for insulation. From there, wagons carried the precious cargo down from the mountains to distribution points in the valleys below. The journey could take weeks, during which a significant portion of the ice would melt away to nothing. Drivers traveled at night when temperatures dropped and rested during the heat of day, racing against the sun to preserve as much of their load as possible. What survived the journey commanded premium prices that would shock modern sensibilities. In San Francisco during the 1850s, ice sold for up to $1 per pound, roughly equivalent to $30 today. Mining towns like Virginia City and Tombstone paid even more, with prices spiking during summer months when demand was highest and supply most precarious. Saloon owners needed ice to keep beer cold and to provide the frozen drinks that parched miners craved after grueling shifts underground. Butchers required it to preserve meat that would otherwise spoil within hours. Doctors used it to treat fevers, reduce swelling, and comfort the dying. The demand spawned elaborate supply, chains spanning thousands of miles. Some companies shipped ice from Alaska, loading ships in Sitka and racing south along the coast before the cargo melted into the hold. Others established ice houses high in the Sierra Nevada, cutting blocks from crystal-clear mountain lakes and hauling them down treacherous trails on mule trains. A few enterprising individuals even attempted to manufacture ice using chemical processes involving ammonia and salt, with mixed and sometimes explosive results. The ice trade began to decline with the introduction of mechanical refrigeration in the 1880s, but it remained a significant industry well into the 20th century. Those blocks of frozen water, carved from distant lakes and packed in sawdust, represented one of the Old West's most essential and most overlooked commodities. Number 5. Canned food killed more than bullets. The canning industry revolutionized food preservation in the 19th century, but it also introduced a silent killer that claimed more lives on the frontier than all the gunfights combined. Lead poisoning from improperly sealed cans became an epidemic among settlers, soldiers, and explorers who relied on preserved foods. Early canning techniques used lead solder to seal the joints of tin cans. The solder would slowly leach into the food inside, particularly acidic items like tomatoes and fruits. A person consuming canned goods regularly would gradually accumulate toxic levels of lead in their system. Symptoms included fatigue, abdominal pain, confusion, and eventually death. The tragic fate of Sir John Franklin's 1845 expedition to find the Northwest Passage is the most famous example. All 129 crew members perished, and modern analysis of their remains revealed catastrophically high lead levels, likely from their canned food supply. While this disaster occurred in the Arctic, the same canned goods were consumed throughout the American West. Settlers heading west packed their wagons with canned meats, vegetables, and fruits, not realizing they were slowly poisoning themselves. Soldiers at frontier outposts subsisted on canned rations for months at a time. The mysterious illnesses that plagued these populations were often attributed to bad air or tainted water, when the true culprit sat in their pantries. It wasn't until the 1890s that the canning industry began transitioning to safer sealing methods. By then, countless frontier residents had suffered the effects of chronic lead exposure, a deadly consequence of a technology meant to sustain them. Number 6. Chinese laundries ruled the frontier. When gold fever swept through California in 1849, thousands of Chinese immigrants arrived seeking their fortunes in the mines. When discriminatory laws and violent persecution forced them out of mining, they turned to a business that would come to dominate frontier towns from San Francisco to Denver: laundry. Chinese laundries became indispensable to the Old West for a simple reason: almost no one else wanted to do the work. Washing clothes was grueling labor involving hauling water, boiling it over fires, scrubbing garments on washboards, and ironing with heavy flat irons heated on stoves. In mining camps where men outnumbered women by ratios of 10 to 1 or higher, laundry services were desperately needed. The Chinese developed innovative techniques that produced superior results. They used rice starch to stiffen collars and cuffs, achieving a crispness that American methods couldn't match. Their ironing techniques removed wrinkles more effectively, and they employed specialized treatments for different fabrics. By 1870, Chinese laundries operated in virtually every town in the West. In San Francisco alone, there were over 2,000 Chinese-owned laundries employing tens of thousands of workers. Some became substantial businesses, while others remained small family operations. The laundries also served as community centers for Chinese immigrants. They provided employment for new arrivals, information about job opportunities, and a connection to home through shared language and culture. Despite facing severe discrimination, including the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, Chinese laundries remained fixtures of Western towns well into the 20th century. Number 7. The gruesome bone trade. After the great buffalo herds were slaughtered in the 1870s and 80s, a new industry arose on the Great Plains, one almost as lucrative as the hide trade that preceded it. Bone picking became a major enterprise, employing thousands of workers who scoured the prairies collecting the skeletal remains of millions of bison. The bones were worth money because Eastern manufacturers needed them for a variety of industrial purposes. Ground bones produced phosphate fertilizers that revitalized depleted farmland. Bone char was used to refine sugar, filtering it to achieve the pure white color consumers demanded. The finest bones were carved into buttons, knife handles, and other decorative items. Homesteaders who arrived on the plains found the bone trade waiting for them. A family could gather bones during the idle months between planting and harvest, stacking them along railroad sidings until buyers arrived. Some settlers earned more from bones in their first years than from farming. Towns like Dodge City and Wichita had bone yards covering acres of land, with skeletal remains piled 15 feet high awaiting shipment east. At the peak of the trade, bones sold for $8 to $12 per ton. Considering that the average picker could gather 2 tons per day, it represented decent wages for the time. Special bone trains ran east, their cars heaped with the remains of the great herds that had once blackened the horizon. By the 1890s, the bones were largely gone, picked clean from the prairies along with the living herds that had produced them. The bone trade represented one final chapter in the eradication of the American bison, turning even their remains into profit. Number 8. Vulcanite dentures were revolutionary. Bad teeth plagued virtually everyone in the Old West. Between the lack of dental care, diets heavy in sugar and starch, and a general indifference to oral hygiene, losing one's teeth was considered an inevitable part of aging. For those who could afford them, dentures offered a solution, but until the 1850s, false teeth were a luxury reserved for the wealthy. Traditional dentures were made from materials like ivory, bone, or human teeth set in gold or silver bases. George Washington's famous dental troubles required dentures crafted from hippopotamus ivory and human teeth, costing a small fortune. The average frontier resident could never dream of affording such craftsmanship. That changed in 1851 when Nelson Goodyear patented vulcanite, a hardened rubber that could be molded to fit a person's mouth and hold porcelain teeth. Vulcanite dentures cost a fraction of their predecessors, typically between $5 and $10 for a full set. Suddenly, false teeth became accessible to farmers, miners, and shopkeepers across the West. Dentists, or those who called themselves dentists, set up shop in frontier towns, offering vulcanite dentures alongside their other services. The results weren't always comfortable or attractive, but they were functional. A person who had been unable to eat solid food could once again enjoy a proper meal. The vulcanite patent generated enormous wealth and equally enormous controversy. The Goodyear Dental Vulcanite Company aggressively pursued dentists who failed to pay licensing fees, leading to resentment and even violence. In 1879, a dentist named Samuel Chalfant murdered the company's chief enforcer, Josiah Bacon, in San Francisco. Despite the legal turmoil surrounding its patent, vulcanite democratized dental care in a way that significantly improved quality of life across the American West. Number 9. Mail-order brides built the West. The gender imbalance in frontier communities created a serious social problem. In many mining towns and cattle regions, men outnumbered women by 10, 20, or even 50 to 1. This scarcity drove a booming trade in what were politely termed correspondence courtships, and what we now call mail-order brides. Women in the crowded cities of the East faced limited opportunities for employment and marriage. Men in the West had land, money, and prospects, but no one to share them with. Newspapers and specialized agencies served as matchmakers, publishing advertisements from both parties and facilitating correspondence across thousands of miles. The Matrimonial News, founded in San Francisco in 1870, became one of the most popular of these publications. Men would pay to place advertisements describing themselves, their property, and the qualities they sought in a wife. Women could respond through the newspaper, and courtships would develop entirely through letters. If both parties were satisfied, the woman would make the journey west, often meeting her future husband for the first time at the train station or stagecoach stop. These arrangements were not without risk. Women sometimes arrived to find that men had misrepresented their circumstances. claiming prosperous ranches that turned out to be dirt-poor homesteads. Men occasionally discovered that their correspondents had been less than truthful about their age or appearance. Yet many of these marriages proved successful, with couples building lives together on the frontier. The practice was especially common among immigrant communities. Scandinavian women came to marry farmers in Minnesota and the Dakotas. Japanese women arrived as picture brides to wed laborers in California. These women didn't just marry men, they built communities, establishing families that would shape the West for generations. Number 10. Cattle drives were deadlier than gunfights. Hollywood would have us believe that cowboys spent their days engaged in shootouts with rustlers and outlaws. The reality was far less glamorous and considerably more dangerous. A cowboy was far more likely to die from the hazards of cattle driving than from any confrontation with firearms. The romance of the Wild West obscures a profession that was grinding, grueling, and frequently fatal. During the great cattle drives of the 1860s and 70s, an estimated 35,000 cowboys moved millions of cattle from Texas to railheads in Kansas and Nebraska. These drives covered distances of up to 1,500 miles and lasted several months. The work was relentless. 18-hour days in the saddle were common, and the conditions brutal. Cowboys endured scorching heat, freezing nights, choking dust, and endless monotony, and the dangers were constant. Drowning was the leading cause of death among cowboys. Rivers swollen with spring rains had to be forded regardless of conditions, and cattle panicked easily in water. Cowboys would swim their horses alongside the herd, shouting and splashing to keep the animals moving forward. One misstep, one spooked steer, and a man could be pulled under by the current. Worse still, he could find himself trampled by thousands of hooves, churning through the water above him. Bodies were sometimes carried miles downstream before being recovered, if they were recovered at all. Stampedes claimed nearly as many lives. A thunderstorm, a snake, a coyote's howl, or even a snapping branch could send a herd of 2,000 cattle into a blind panic. The ground would shake as the animals surged forward in the darkness, and cowboys had to ride at full gallop through the night, trying to reach the leaders and turn them until the herd ran in a circle and exhausted itself. This required riding at breakneck, speed over terrain the cowboy couldn't see, trusting his horse completely. Being thrown in the middle of a stampede meant almost certain death beneath the hooves of cattle that couldn't stop even if they wanted to. Other hazards included lightning strikes. Cowboys on horseback in open country were natural targets. Horse falls on uneven ground, heat stroke, snake bites, and diseases like cholera and dysentery that swept through camps with contaminated water. Gunfight fatalities among cowboys were rare by comparison. The typical cowboy never drew his weapon in anger, but he faced death every single day from the ordinary dangers of his profession. Number 11. Opium was legal and everywhere. The modern war on drugs would have baffled residents of the Old West, where opium and its derivatives were as common as whiskey and considerably more respectable. Laudanum, a tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, sat on the shelves of every general store and pharmacy in the frontier. Doctors prescribed opium for virtually every ailment: coughs, diarrhea, menstrual cramps, teething pain in infants, and of course, the chronic pain that plagued a population without access to modern medicine. Patent medicines with names like Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup and Dover's Powder contained substantial doses of opium and were marketed directly to families. Women were particularly heavy users. Respectable society frowned upon women drinking alcohol, but taking laudanum for female complaints or nervous conditions was perfectly acceptable. By some estimates, women constituted the majority of opium users in 19th century America. Chinese immigrants brought the practice of smoking opium, establishing dens in the Chinatowns of San Francisco, Portland, and other western cities. These dens catered primarily to Chinese laborers, but attracted white customers as well. enough that cities began passing ordinances against opium smoking specifically to discourage racial mixing. The first anti-drug laws in America targeted these opium dens, rather than the patent medicines that addicted far more people. San Francisco passed the nation's first anti-opium law in 1875, making it illegal to operate a smoking establishment. The widespread medical use of opium continued largely unregulated until the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. Number 12. Women disguised as men. The Old West offered freedom and opportunity, but primarily for men. Women who wanted to work as miners, soldiers, or cowboys faced an obvious obstacle. Their gender excluded them from these professions. Some women found a solution that was as simple as it was audacious. They disguised themselves as men and lived their lives accordingly. The phenomenon was more common than most people realize. Hundreds of documented cases exist of women who successfully passed as men in the 19th century West, and countless others surely went undetected. These women bound their chests, cut their hair, adopted male names, and went to work alongside men who never suspected the truth. One of the most famous was Charlie Parkhurst, a stagecoach driver who worked the treacherous routes of Gold Rush, California. Parkhurst was renowned for handling the ribbons, driving 6-horse teams through mountain passes and across swollen rivers. After Parkhurst's death in 1879, the undertaker discovered the legendary driver had been a woman all along and had at some point given birth to a child. Mountain Charlie, whose real name was Elsa Jane Guerin, worked as a cabin boy, railroad brakeman, and saloon owner while disguised as a man. She claimed to have adopted the disguise to support her children after her husband's death. Her memoir, published in 1861, became a minor sensation. These women's motivations varied. Some sought economic opportunity, others craved adventure. A few were escaping abusive situations where their identity as women made them vulnerable. Whatever their reasons, they demonstrated that the boundaries supposedly separating men's and women's spheres were far more permeable than society wanted to admit. Number 13. The Pony Express lasted only 18 months. Few institutions are more iconic of the Old West than the Pony Express, with its brave young riders galloping across the wilderness to deliver the mail. The image is so powerful that most people assume the Pony Express operated for years, perhaps decades. In fact, it lasted just 18 months and lost money the entire time. The Pony Express was founded in 1860 by the freighting firm of Russell, Majors & Waddell to carry mail between St. Joseph, Missouri, and Sacramento, California. The route stretched nearly 2,000 miles across prairies, deserts, and mountains, with relay stations positioned every 10 to 15 miles. Riders would gallop between stations, switching to fresh horses in under 2 minutes, covering between 75 and 100 miles, before handing off the mail to the next rider. The service was genuinely impressive. Mail that previously took 3 weeks to travel from coast to coast by stagecoach now arrived in 10 days. During the 1860 presidential election, the Pony Express delivered Lincoln's inaugural address to California in just 7 days and 17 hours, a remarkable achievement. However, the enterprise was doomed from the start. The Pony Express charged $5 per half ounce, roughly $150 today, which was too expensive for most correspondents. The volume of mail never approached what was needed to cover operating costs. Russell, Majors, and Waddell hemorrhaged money with every rider they dispatched. The final blow came in October 1861 when the transcontinental telegraph was completed. Instantaneous communication rendered the Pony Express obsolete overnight. The company ceased operations 2 days after the telegraph line opened, having operated for just 19 months. Number 14. Tombstone had running water before Los Angeles. The Arizona town of Tombstone is remembered for gunfights and silver mines, but it deserves recognition for a more civilized achievement. It had running water before Los Angeles did. In 1881, Tombstone completed a water system that delivered piped water throughout the town, a luxury that many larger cities had yet to achieve. The system was a remarkable feat of frontier engineering. Water was collected from springs in the Huachuca Mountains, 23 miles away, and carried to Tombstone through wooden pipes. A reservoir held 350,000 gallons, providing enough supply for the town's 8,000 residents, as well as firefighting needs. The Tombstone Water, Mill and Lumber Company built the system at a cost of over $200,000, an enormous investment for a mining town that had existed for less than 3 years. But water was essential. The desert location made local supplies scarce, and fires had already destroyed portions of the town. Without reliable water, Tombstone could not survive. The system featured hydrants throughout the business district, and residents could purchase water delivered through pipes to their homes and businesses. Tombstone's water pressure proved sufficient to fight fires effectively, a capability that would be tested repeatedly as blazes swept through the wooden buildings. Los Angeles, meanwhile, relied on a primitive system of open ditches called zanjas until 1868, when it began building a modern water system. Even then, piped water reached only portions of the city. It wasn't until the 1880s that Los Angeles achieved the comprehensive water delivery that Tombstone had established years earlier. This forgotten fact speaks to Tombstone's ambitions. Despite its Wild West reputation, the town aspired to permanence and civilization, even if that dream ultimately went unfulfilled. Number 15. The real reason cowboys wore bandanas. The bandana is as essential to the cowboy's image as the hat and boots. Movies show bandits pulling them up over their faces to hide their identities during robberies, and this certainly happened. But the original purpose of the bandana was far more practical. It was a multi-purpose survival tool that no working cowboy could do without. The primary function was protection from dust. Cattle drives kicked up enormous clouds of dirt that choked men and horses alike. Cowboys riding at the back of a herd, the worst position, typically assigned to the newest hands, would breathe dust all day without relief. A bandana pulled over the nose and mouth made the difference between tolerating the job and being unable to perform it. But the bandana served dozens of other purposes. Soaked in water, it provided cooling relief in summer heat. Tied around the forehead, it kept sweat from dripping into the eyes. Used as a pot holder, it protected hands from hot cookware. Wrapped around a wound, it served as a bandage. Fashioned into a sling, it immobilized an injured arm. Tied to a stick, it became a signal flag. Cowboys also used bandanas to blindfold horses during saddling, to strain sediment from drinking water, to wrap around ears in cold weather, and to wipe down their mounts. A lost bandana was a genuine hardship. Cowboys would ride miles out of their way to retrieve one that blew off in the wind. The garment typically measured about 22 inches square and was usually red or blue. Red was preferred because it didn't show dirt as readily and was easy to spot if dropped. The bandana was worn loosely knotted around the neck, ready to be pulled up at a moment's notice when the dust began to rise. Far from a mere fashion accessory, the bandana was essential equipment, as vital to the working cowboy as his rope or his saddle. The Old West was a place of contradictions, both more brutal and more innovative than we typically imagine. Behind the legends of gunslingers and outlaws lies a world where camels roamed the desert, where women defended themselves with hatpins, and where the simple act of eating canned food could prove fatal. These 15 facts represent only a fraction of the strange and fascinating reality that existed west of the Mississippi in the 19th century. The true Old West was wilder, weirder, and more wonderful than any myth we've created to replace it.